Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is the official podcast for the fan site, avatarthelastairbender.online.com. This is going to be our review special for Legend of Korra, Runes of the Empire Part 1. So in this podcast, we're pretty much just going to be focusing completely 100% on the newly released Korra comic, Runes of the Empire Part 1. I'm going to be your main host for this podcast, Morgan Airspeed Prime, and joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So to start off, there's just a couple of little things to get through. Very briefly in news, Imbalance Part 3 has been delayed again. That brings the count up to 3 delays within a week. Last week it was September 10th, then they changed it to the 17th, then they changed it to the 24th, then like yesterday they changed it to the 1st of October. So the result of this is that we have a book coming out on October 1st, a book coming out on October 2nd, and a book coming out on October 8th. They really like to spread these books around throughout the year, as you can see. 3 books in 7 days is pretty crazy. Again, no explanation given whatsoever for this delay. Again, I don't know what they're doing. I assume it won't stay like that. I'd be shocked if all 3 of those books came out at the same time. I get a feeling Team Avatar Tales is probably going to change dates again, just because 2 books in 2 days seems a bit weird, especially when they both have the different release kind of schedules of like, Team Avatar Tales isn't getting the digital release first, it's actually comic book stores first, and the day before Imbalance is getting released digitally. Very, very confusing altogether. But just very quickly, Greg, what are your thoughts on the current release schedule with all these delays and everything coming out within a week in October?
I mean, that would be cool if that's what happens, even though that's not usually the best sort of thing that you want. But I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, there hasn't been any real reason that I've heard, so it's just kind of curious.
Yeah. But yeah, before we get into Runes of the Empire Part 1, I think we need to talk a little bit about Kuvira, because she's kind of the star of the show here in this book, and I think it's important to get some context for, I suppose, what we know of her from the show, and then versus, I suppose, what the book is kind of going ahead and doing with her. So, the main thing to talk about with Kuvira, I think, at the start, is that, in a way, Runes of the Empire benefits from the fact that a lot of her backstory stuff is relatively underdeveloped within the show. Whenever we've discussed book 4 of the podcast, we've often brought it up as like a criticism of like, you know, Kuvira's a really good character, but they're definitely lacking with some of the depth and the details on it. When it comes to like her relationship with Su Yin and the specifics of that, and especially as we'll get into as we discuss the book, what they do with Kuvira's backstory as an orphan. So we'll start with that, and I suppose what we know about it. And this is from the episode Enemy at the Gates from book 4. And Korra just goes up to Su Yin and asks, "How did things get so bad between you and Kuvira? I thought she was your protege." Su Yin says, "She was more than that. She was like a daughter to me. I took her in when she was 8 years old and nourished her talents. Kuvira was a smart and natural leader and quickly rose through the ranks. I saw myself in her." And then they go through the whole idea of 3 years ago, you know, that's when things changed between them. But that's the backstory, and that's what kind of informs Korra going into the finale when she says to Kuvira in the last episode, where's the specific line? Yeah, "Su told me how she took you in when you were younger. It must have been so hard being an orphan." Kuvira says, "Don't pretend you know what it felt like. The Avatar is adored by millions. I was cast aside by my own parents like I meant nothing to them. How could I just stand by and watch the same thing happen to my nation when it needed someone to guide it?" So, Greg, what's your take, I suppose, prior to reading Runes of the Empire, what was your take kind of heading into the book, just based on what book 4 and a little bit of book 3 did with Kuvira?
I mean, I guess heading into it, I mean, when you mentioned those sort of parts, those are sort of the key elements that we know about Kuvira and just sort of, you know, her relation with Sulin and the family and the Beifong family, just all of that. So, I mean, I definitely, you know, expected, I guess, for this book, just with her being the focus of it to really sort of go around that sort of aspect, which they do mention. There's definitely a couple parts in this book that talk about that, which I think is probably some of the more, I guess, interesting parts at the very least of this comic. So I think, it's not a lot, which is something that we always sort of mention. Like we sort of always wonder what was the real sort of connection. I mean, the whole idea of being an orphan, being a cast out, which you definitely see, some of that in here, which I'm sure we'll go into more detail later on. I think, it gives you, I guess, at least a starting point for what's, coming down the line, not knowing that much more. So I think, I don't know. I mean, I guess it was enough, for the series, maybe not enough as what we all sort of wanted, but, it gives you some idea for her logic, some reasoning. It's just not as much as we might have hoped at the time, which we're getting more of finally.
Hmm. But yeah, the key line from that is Kuvira specifically herself saying, I was cast aside by my own parents, and this book making us very much kind of think about that. And then the other thing to think about is obviously just how close was she. Sue says to Korra, I thought of her like a daughter, and we get obviously later on the fact that it seemingly, one moment sort of turned them against each other, and that's when Su Yin was asked to kind of step in and take place as like the temporary leader to bring stability to the Earth Kingdom, but she refused, and that's when kind of Kuvira stepped up, and that's when of course she takes Batar Jr. and they go off and form the Earth Empire. And it kind of always felt like if they were that close, why would something it's an important kind of political issue, but why would it just immediately turn that relationship off? And that's what this book is, of course, kind of meant to deal with. So just important to keep some of those things in mind as we go forward. But yeah, let's get into the book. Legend of Korra, Ruins of the Empire, Part 1, written by Michael Dante DiMartino, art by Michelle Wong, colors by Vivian Ng, lettering by Rachel Deering, and the cover was also by Michelle Wong and Vivian Ng. So, yeah, let's just jump straight in, and we start off in the Earth Empire re-education camp in Geylang. Geylang obviously being the hometown of the Beifongs, so this is where Toph is actually originally from. It says 3 months ago, and we are immediately introduced to Commander Guan and also Dr. Shang. So we get, please tell me you made some progress since the last time we spoke. And she says, I'm getting better responses from the subjects, Commander. That's not why I'm here. And she says that the radio operators just heard from our forces in Republic City that Kuvira surrendered to the Avatar. She ordered all Earth Empire officers and soldiers to lay down their arms immediately. Guan was getting shaved by someone at this point in time, and he just grabs the razor and throws it. He's furious upon hearing this, and he can't believe that Kuvira would turn her back on the Earth and the Empire like that on us. Shang also doesn't understand it, but he's happy that he has heard that she is getting better responses from the subjects, and orders her to continue the experiments, and that he specifically will not be surrendering. The forces that he has are going to stick around, and he notes about them that when these soldiers came to us, they were pathetic, a disgrace to the uniform. Even Kuvira had little hope they could be redeemed, but you showed me that within every broken shell lies a seed waiting to grow anew. Thanks to us, these men and women are now a force to be reckoned with, and their potential has yet to be fulfilled. The Great Uniter's reign may be over, but the Earth Empire will never die, as we get a shot of Kuvira in prison. So what are your thoughts on the kind of first scene here with getting introduced to Commander Guan and Dr. Shang and just dealing with the fallout from Book 4?
Yeah, well, I definitely like how they jump into it, just sort of, I mean, they sort of, catch us up on what sort of happened. They even have, one shot of actually, seeing, Kuvira in chains, right after the whole aftermath and everything. So I think this is definitely, I don't know, I like how they introduce him. I mean, it's nothing that's like super crazy or super, that you haven't seen before. Like, I think it's kind of like a classic sort of trope to see like your commander sort of getting shaved and he gets sort of information and, he sort of gets upset. So it's nothing too crazy, but it's interesting just to see, another person from, the empire here and how they're sort of, how they command their forces, and how, it's interesting how this is, one commander who, obviously is very sort of talented and skilled, as we later on hear, and how he's sort of, almost has his own sort of, at least in the beginning, it wasn't an elite group, but now it is an elite group. And, with the help of, his second, in command, or, the science, officer, that, he's able to sort of do things that, you otherwise might not have thought. So it's definitely, interesting way of finding this other sort of group that, has some reasoning for being where they're at, not just, sort of random, sort of offshoot type of group. So I like that there's at least some history behind it, some sort of backing.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely like that we start off in a re-education camp, and then they're talking about experiments and so on. And then even I think with the end of the book in mind, you can kind of think about the fact that Guan says, "You showed me that within every broken shell there lies a seed waiting to grow new." And she's all about the experiments, so you're kind of thinking like, has the re-education kind of process, as we'll get to at the end of the book, been done on these soldiers to make them not pathetic and a disgrace anymore? And I think that adds something to it in terms of like, they're clearly getting across the idea that over the course of this book, Kuvira was the one with like the charisma and could get people behind her just through loyalty. He perhaps doesn't quite have that, but is kind of stepping up to the plate now, and has the different methods he's done to get to that point. But yeah, really good shot there of just kind of showing that the Earth Empire is going to live on in a smaller way, even though Kuvira has surrendered basically. But we move on. We cut to City Hall, Republic City, in the present day. And we get Bolin, who is now President Zhu Li's assistant, and he says, after the speech you gave at 1 o'clock. After the speech, you have at 1 o'clock with Councilman Huang about the evacuee relocation. Then at 2 o'clock with Wan Yongkum and Tenzin to sign the paperwork transferring his lands to the Air Nation. That's just kind of resolving stuff from the end of Turf Wars. And then Varric asks, what's the soonest I can get a dinner date on the books with my beautiful wife? And he says, I don't have anything until the end of the month. She's got a lot on her plate. And Varric is like, who knew that being the president would be so much work? And Bolin is just like, yeah, she knew. She completely knew. That's when Asami, Korra, Mako, and King Wu arrive in. He congratulates her on winning her election. And they're like, are you ready for your big speech which is going to be about announcing the elections in the Earth Kingdom? Wu, of course, has a dynamic with Mako, so he's like, will you deliver the speech for me, Mako? And he's like, you're the king, you have to do it. And he says that you have to just be yourself. Be myself, I can do that. You always know the right thing to say, Mako. Must be why I keep you around. And Mako's like, yeah, must be. And interestingly, Mako is not wearing any sort of a cast anymore, but you can see on his forearm it is pretty badly burned all over it, but it seems to be working again at the very least. So what are your thoughts on these first 2 pages here in this scene?
Yeah, no, I think this is definitely, it's a good, I guess, sort of interaction of all our characters, getting to see Bolin in his new position, which they definitely make a note of in the next couple pages. And, to see Wu here, he's still at the core his same sort of character. So it's nice to see, his dynamic, like you mentioned, that him and Mako have going back and forth. And yes, seeing, Mako outside of the cast now, it seems like he's healed up, but, I'm guessing that scar isn't something that's ever gonna sort of go away, and he has his sleeves pulled up. So, but no, I think it's nice just to see how things have been progressing since our last time reading about all these characters.
Mm-hmm. So we immediately cut to Wu's speech. He says, "Good morning, everyone. As you all know, a couple of months ago, I declared my intention to step down as Earth King and abolish the monarchy. Well, after much planning and many discussions with the leaders of the Earth Kingdom states, that time is almost upon us." And of course, Grandma Yin from the crowd says, "Boo, long live the monarchy," as she's holding her pictures of both the previous Earth Queen as well as King Wu. And she's told, "Shh, Grandma, you promised Mako and Bolin to behave yourself." And he says, "I'm pleased to announce that the very first democratic election will take place 2 weeks from today in the state of Geylang." Second mention of that place, so that's going to be our big kind of place where everything kind of kicks off. And then we cut to everyone noting how well Wu was doing in the speech. Korra says he's doing great, and Mako notes, better than I expected. He almost looks like a real leader up there. And Wu explains, after the vote in Geylang, elections will continue in the other states. Within a year, the Earth Kingdom will have completed its peaceful transition to democracy. Any questions? And this is the bit he's not prepared for. Suddenly, the press asks tons of different questions. How are you going to ensure they're fair? Do you think the timetable is realistic? He doesn't have any idea how to answer it, so he starts singing. But we'll get into that in just a second. What are your thoughts here on, I suppose, the plan? We knew that this was like democracy, elections was roughly the plan from book 4, but here's how it's going to be like executed. Geylang first, and then each state one at a time in actual elections.
Yeah, no, I mean, realistically, that seems like a good way to actually, go about it. Just sort of, sort of progress it, sort of, and rather than trying to do it in like one full sweep or anything like that. So, the plan sounds good. Wu gives the speech, pretty well. I mean, Wu seems like he's progressed to the point where if he knows like exactly what to do, then he can pretty much do it. But it's just sort of when he's sort of thrown into unknown waters, he usually, seems to not know what to do or fall back on his sort of common sort of tropes that he normally does.
Yeah, and I think Wu is actually quite good in this book. He can definitely go up and down in like the show in regards to like was he annoying or was he actually good. But I think since his end of book 4 development, he's actually a pretty good character here, and they use the sensible and comedic sides of him pretty well here. There is obviously questions here. It's not perfect, I suppose, is the idea here, and that like stuff like Zhao Fu, is Zhao Fu included in these elections or not? Like, is Bossing Say just considered one state even though it's so big? And so on. Omashu, given that it had a king previously, how does that work? But the idea realistically is that just every new place has a election. But he sings his response here. He says, I find your questions quite absurd. I've given everyone my word. I'm going to step down and throw away my crown, as he throws his hat to Grandma Yin in the crowd. And Korra says to Mako, well, you did tell him to be himself, as Mako has his head in his hands. That's not what I meant. Just sit back and you'll see my kingdom's going to be free and everyone is going to thank me. As he says, I'm a little woozy, and Julie steps in to save him. I think what the king is trying to express through the medium of song is that once the other states see Geyling's smooth transition to democracy, the others will be encouraged and follow suit. Next question, as Wu collapses in the background and is saved by Mako. So, here's the comedic side of Wu. I quite like it, and I like Julie stepping in. That she is she's new, but she is perfect for the role, basically. I like the inclusion of her here as well. But Greg, your thoughts on these pages?
Yeah, no, Zuli stepping in, I think that seems like something that she would do. She's probably quite used to dealing with, random characters' sort of antics and stuff. So I think that definitely was a nice transition that they had there. And, Wu sort of singing his response, I guess, he's clearly, nervous at this point. But, I think, if he would have formatted those questions, without singing, his responses, I think it probably would have worked just as well. But it's his character, is what he would do.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense with Julie, like who's her husband. Like if anyone needs like interpretation at times, it's him. And obviously we know his weird ideas that he gets from like hanging upside down. She was the one who had to like interpret them, so of course she can interpret Wu's singing. But we then cut to what was the preview for the book, which is the trial section of the book. But I still think it's one of the most important sections, so I think it's worth going through. Absolutely. So Kuvira says, I yielded to the Avatar, I gave up my empire, I surrendered my freedom. The people I once considered family hate me, but that isn't enough for them. Now those in power want to humiliate me. As the court basically gives her what she's being accused of. You stand accused of crimes against peace during your reign as the leader of the Earth Empire. Your transgressions included refusing to turn over emergency powers granted to you by former President Raiko and King Wu, numerous wars of aggression throughout the Earth Kingdom states, presiding over inhumane prison camps, invading the United Republic, a sovereign nation, and the use of spirit energy as a weapon of mass destruction. How do you plead? and she says, I'm sorry for the harm I caused to the people of the Earth Kingdom and the city, I truly am, but this tribunal seems all too eager to list my offenses without giving any considerations to my achievements. After the fall of the Earth Queen, the kingdom fell into chaos and no one was willing to step up. I brought back order. I dragged an ancient culture out of the Dark Ages and modernized it. Everything I did for the greater good of the Earth Kingdom and its citizens. How do you plead? Not guilty, is what she says. So this was the big thing. This got the hype going completely for the book. I suppose we've had so many months to look at these couple of pages, but Greg, now that the full book is out, what are your thoughts on the big trial section here for Kuvira?
Yeah, no, I still think it's as good as I thought it was before. I think it's nice just how they sort of started with the whole sort of inner monologue, and then they sort of break it out to the actual sort of court case, and just the way that they set up this whole scene with everyone looking on, especially sort of the close shot of her where you can see the whole everyone sort of behind her. I think the perspective on that is definitely really cool. So no, I think it's definitely a really intriguing part of the book. Even though usually you're depending on your preference, sometimes the political more side of things isn't quite as interesting. But I think with everything that happened in season 4, and how we're finally sort of getting the resolution of things, I think this is definitely the most sort of beginning, most interesting part of this, just sort of seeing everything sort of laid out to bear, or at least what people are accusing her of, just to see that.
Yeah, and a lot of people bring up the idea that, like, at the end of book 4, she specifically said that she'd accept any punishment that they see fit, and this seems to kind of contradict that. But I suppose the idea is, like, her saying not guilty doesn't mean that when they decide on her punishment, she won't accept it. She just is not. She's unwilling to just basically to say guilty and have them just be like, okay, everything is on you. You're the only one who did this, and it's completely all on you. Not acknowledging any good that she did, because as she notes, she was the one who did step in to fill that role. That these elections that are happening wouldn't be able to happen if she hadn't come in to stabilize things. And then, now they've sort of benefited from the fact that Kuvira surrendered, and the stability is still sort of left there in the aftermath of that. So it is important to note that, but also that, yeah, she is guilty of basically all of these things completely. And I don't think there's really much of an argument against it. But, obviously, without her explaining the full details of why she says not guilty, it's just us kind of speculating that it is likely just that she wants. She wants every part of it discussed, positives and negatives, and she will, I suppose, accept any punishment. But we'll get into that as we go on. But I suppose what is your take on that? Like, just based off this section, why does she specifically say not guilty here?
Yeah, I mean, it really seems like she still believes in everything that that she accomplished as, sort of trying to bring back order to the Earth Kingdom and everything that sort of happened before. I mean, she even mentions that, later on when she's confronting Guam, just sort of, how, she's still proud of what they did. Now, she clearly went about it, in ways that, pretty much everyone would disagree with, which is the issue that they're bringing up here. But what she actually did, to her, she actually feels that there was no other way for that to actually happen, which is what she's attempting to say here. But if she were to just say guilty, then it probably would be all sort of brushed under the rug real quickly.
But then in the aftermath of this, Kuvira is being escorted past everyone, and Su Yin has to say something to Kuvira. Not guilty, the whole world knows what you did, Kuvira. What are you trying to prove? Don't turn your back on me. Kuvira says, I know I hurt you and your family, but you all turned your backs on me long before the Earth Empire ever existed. That's a lie. I gave you a home, I provided for you. But I was never really part of your family, was I? You attacked Zhao Fu, you almost killed my son, and have apologized numerous times. When will you see through all of your anger to forgive me? That's what you don't get. Being sorry isn't enough. You need to take responsibility for what you've done. Goodbye, Kuvira. So It is a very, very interesting dynamic between these two. This is the big one we've been waiting for in the book, and here's the first hint of it. We know Sue is very, very angry at Kuvira for what happened, because the rest of her family was the one who sort of like suffered most from it in a way. They were held prisoner, Batar Jr. was nearly killed, they were all pretty much nearly killed at one point. And she, I suppose, from Soo Yin's perspective, is hurt by this because she basically, as far as we're aware, did treat her as a daughter, and this response feels like crazy considering everything that she did for her. But then from Kavira's perspective, she's saying, you all turned your backs on me long ago. I was never really part of the family, was I? And you don't really know what way to take it of like, was it happy mother-daughter thing, or was it like very distant, and was it more of a protege thing compared to anything else? We know she's raised her since she was 8 years old. That's what I read out. Soo Yin directly saying it, and I suppose Kuvira stating it in the other scene that she was an orphan at one point. And she succeeded well in that as well. So she, like, if Soo Yin was like holding her back, she wouldn't have been the captain of the guard and all that sort of stuff. So someone's not being completely truthful here, and you usually lean in the direction of like the villain in that case, just because Kuvira's she's definitely, it's hard to figure out exactly what she's thinking throughout all of this. But what are your thoughts on this first interaction between Kuvira and Soo Yin?
Yeah, no, you definitely have a point there that usually, you would go against sort of, the villain in this sort of conflict here of who's telling the truth versus the other. But we also know that, Sue also has a particular way of, sort of seeing things from her own sort of way. So there's also that to sort of consider. I mean, for the longest, people thought that there was something fishy going on with her, which, turned out not to be true in that sort of sense. But, she still has, an interesting way of seeing things. Not to say that, everything else that Kuvira did isn't bad, since, like you said, she did almost, even including Team Avatar, pretty much all their lives were, in jeopardy at one point for what Kuvira thought at the time was the best way to sort of deal with everything. So there's definitely some issues there, but it seems like there's something deeper now. It may just be that it's just sort of not, maybe one or the other sort of looking at it, more or less favorably than the other. But there definitely seems like, there seems to be enough, conflict here that there's something that happened before this whole, sort of Earth Empire thing sort of took place here. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what that, really is and who's telling more truth.
Yeah, because like presently, I suppose you'd say they basically both feel like they betrayed each other. Kuvira feels Soo Yin betrayed her and the Earth Kingdom by not stepping in when she was asked to, and that's why Kuvira had to step up with Korra out of the picture. From Sue's perspective, Kuvira betrayed her and her whole family by going from being, part of the family to taking Batar, a lot of the wealthy people from Zaofu, and forming the Earth Empire. But like you say, there's clearly stuff that happened when she was younger and just the general dynamic of what she was like within the family. But final things to note here, I think, are just Sue saying you need to take responsibility for what you've done, I think, is a sort of theme that we're meant to kind of keep in mind for Kuvira throughout the book, of just has she or has she not, Kuvira, taken responsibility for what she's done. Because you immediately see in the previous kind of line from Kuvira, and I've apologized numerous times, when will you see through it? And that tends to be her approach, like throughout all of this book. She's wronged so many people, and she interacts with them as if, like, she said sorry, everything's just, fine now, that nothing else needs to be done, and she doesn't quite get why that's not enough, and that's sort of the problem. But move on to the next scene, and it's another scene with Team Avatar, this time going to talk to President Zhu Li. So Bolin brings them inside. Mako asks him, how's the new job going? And he says, I think I finally found my true calling. Serving varicakes? No, politics. And Mako's like, yeah, we'll see about that. That's what you said about pro bending and acting and working for Kuvira and being a cop. And Bolin's like, gasp. Are you suggesting that I'm fickle? And he's like, no, I'm saying you have an aversion to commitment. Just because you found yourself doesn't mean the rest of us have, is what Bolin says in response to that. And Julie thanks everyone for coming, and we see that Wu is also there as well. So Korra also notes that I used to dread meetings with the president. Now I look forward to them, and everything's so much smoother now that we don't have an antagonistic force in the leadership position. But this is a very interesting one with Bolin here. We were all sort of confused by the end of Turf Wars that Bolin's a cop now. This seems like a good position for him, but then he's out of that by the end of the book. Now there's this, and it also seems like they're setting up that this assistant position is also not perfect for him and that he won't stick with it. I really am not sure what they're doing with it. I wouldn't say it's a criticism that I have with the book for doing this. I like that they're giving Bolin an arc. I just can't see where they're going with it just yet, but I am intrigued by where they're going with it. But Greg, what are your thoughts on Bolin's commitment issues that they seem to be setting up here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's as much, sort of commitment as it just sort of he's, like he sort of says, he just hasn't found himself yet with what he really wants to do. And, it's not like any of our characters are, particularly of like old age. They're all still pretty young. So, a lot of people do sort of jump around from job to job. But I guess, Mako sort of being the older brother, he definitely sees things from a different perspective since, Bolin has worked, quite a number of jobs. But I mean, all the jobs that he has had, he has, done a pretty good job at actually doing them. So that's he definitely, Bowen definitely has a pretty interesting sort of skill set that whenever he does figure out what it is that he is going to do, which I don't know, maybe we'll find it by the end of the book, maybe not. I mean, there's definitely, I mean, I don't know. I could see, there's a lot of speculation I could think of what he could actually do if he's really sort of in politics with the way that, this whole book is about. So I don't know. That could be, hinting at, things to come, which I think might be cool if that's what he actually, decides to do. But, he has a lot of different options, which I think is pretty cool. His character arc is probably the most one that we can't really see, what it's going to be, which I think is probably pretty cool for once not to actually be able to like super guess, what it's going to be by, the first chapter of the book or whatever.
Yeah, like like I say every time we talk about kind of Bolin's futures, like he's one of like the most powerful benders in the series at this point in time, just because he's a great normal Earth bender, he's an athlete, and he now has lava bending as well. Like and as you say, like he is kind of talented at everything to a certain degree, more or less. So, what direction are they taking? I suppose you'd say his ultimate talent is just that he tends to get people to like him very easily. So it's kind of like with elections coming up, like, is Bolin gonna run for election in one of these places or something like that? And but like then you're like, where would it be Bossing Say? Because it's his home. I don't know. That'd be a really weird position for Bolin to be in as like the governor of Bossing Say. It would be cool, but like it'd be like a big surprise. But we don't know just yet. But next we have Wu speaking up. He says, I asked you all here this morning because I'd like Team Avatar to join me in Geylang for the upcoming election. And he says to Mako, no, it's not just to be your entourage, basically. There's a legitimate reason. He says, my kingdom is being threatened by the Earth Empire. And they're like, they surrendered? Do you not remember? And he says, but recently I've received some reports about a group of holdouts hiding in Geylang that never surrendered. Kuvira gutted the Earth Kingdom army when she took power. We've been doing our best to round up the Earth Empire stragglers, but the army is still understaffed. And Zhu Li gets a file out and says that the leader of the holdouts is one of Kuvira's former commanders, a man by the name of Guan. And you're worried Guan might and his troops might disrupt the election. Yes. And Korra says, if he does try to stop people from voting, it might give the other states an excuse to call off their elections. And it will put the whole democratic movement in jeopardy. And they can't let this happen. And so they all agree, including Zhu Li, that it would be a good idea for the Avatar to stand with King Wu as a symbol of peace. So they all agree that this is something that they're going to do. They'll go with Wu. Bolin asks specifically, could I go too? And she says, yep, of course, Team Avatar wouldn't be the same without you. And we get a little bit of a reference to the start of this scene. Before you say anything, I'm not being fickle. I'm just taking a few days off. Then I'm right back here doing what I love. And as they walk out of the room, Julie says, after you clear away the refreshments, I have some paperwork that needs filing. And he says, yes, ma'am. And then, very notably, the last panel here before we cut away is Bolin with a plate of Vara cakes sighing. So he isn't super into what he's doing right now. But yeah, that's just the kind of basic plot setup of our heroes find out about Guan. They all together are going to go and monitor the situation in Geylang and be there with Wu. So I like that they're not splitting up the team. They're allowing the team to have the full dynamics that they need to. And yeah, further setup for Bolin's arc of whatever he's going to do. Any thoughts on these couple of pages?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, like you said, it is nice that they're sort of keeping the whole team together. I mean, they have, such an interesting sort of dynamic. It's always nice to see them as sort of a group here, even if, eventually they're going to have to sort of go and do their own thing here. But I think, it seems like it's an important enough sort of, situation here that, of course, the Avatar is going to be there, and, any support that she can have, I think is definitely pretty cool to have. So, yeah, no, I think this is definitely a cool way to sort of set things up and to see, all the little things that are sort of happening behind here as well. Just sort of, the little ideas with sort of Bolin and maybe not being as happy with his job, sort of him and, sort of being a bit sort of upset with Mako not giving him the sort of snacks here that he sort of brought out here. So, there's definitely some things that are going to be worked out over time as we come along with this story.
Mm-hmm. Next, we have our first, I suppose, Korra-Sami scene. And Korra says to Asami, I think you and I should pay Kuvira a visit. I want to find out what she knows about Commander Guan. Asami says, that's a good idea, but it's probably best if you go without me. I don't want to be in the same room as her. And Korra asks, is that why you didn't come to the trial? Because Asami, notably, of all of the main characters, is noted as not being at the trial. Asami, as we expected, her response is, Kuvira took my father from me. I didn't need to be reminded of all the other horrible things she's done. And Korra says, it's alright, I'll talk to her on my own. And Asami says, thanks for understanding, good luck. And she kisses her on the cheek. And Korra leaves and says, I'll catch up with you later. So the setup from like the back of the book that, when Korra and Team Avatar don't all see eye to eye as to the solution, they're not doing it in the sort of extreme way that we maybe expected. It's more of Asami doesn't want to be anywhere near Kuvira, but she understands why Korra is going to have to interact with Kuvira given what's happening. And it's more or less the same with the other characters as we get introduced to their thoughts on Kuvira, where it's like they have their opinions on her and they're kind of different than Korra's, but they're willing to trust Korra's opinion on it. It's not like the team is being ripped apart because Kuvira is suddenly involved in things. So I found that interesting that they didn't lean too much into, arguments about Kuvira. But what are your thoughts on this Korra and Asami scene?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely, a good way to do it. I think they're definitely more level-headed in this sort of situation and seeing things sort of as a whole picture here. So, the fact that they can have this sort of, back and forth, somewhat sort of intimate sort of conversation about this and everything that sort of happened with Asami, I think is definitely, it's a nice moment to sort of have here. And it's definitely, I think, it could be something that becomes bigger later on in sort of like the next book or so, depending on how they have to sort of, continue to sort of deal with Kuvira. But I guess sort of at least sort of the initial sort of way of, at least just speaking with her right now is not something that's so sort of out there that you wouldn't expect her, Korra actually having to do, since it's still, stuff dealing with the Earth Empire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just I like the kind of incorporation of the kind of Korra-Sami relationship into things. They're not pushing it as hard as they were in Turf War, so it kind of feels a little bit more natural. And I actually think Asami stands out a little bit more because she actually has like a full opinion on Kuvira. It still again is kind of like it's all about her father again, but like I get why they have to do this. But again, the hope would be that at some point she gets a kind of arc or character development kind of piece on her own. But that's to hope for the future. But yeah, we move on. So Korra goes on Naga to the prison, and it is basically the same prison, or I suppose this is where it's kind of unclear, and that like it looks like the same prison that like Zahir is in, but where are the different cells? Are they different like mountain things like this or not? It's a big prison. I assume it's just that they're both in there. Korra only is here to see Kuvira, but again, nice to see the visuals of this place again. But the important thing is what happens next, and that we cut actually to Kuvira, but specifically Kuvira like with her eyes closed, thinking about her past, and we get 2 pages of backstory here. So it's a little Kuvira here, looks in or around 8, I suppose, so it sort of fits, I suppose, if this is indeed the scene we're seeing. The character, who I assume is her like actual mother and not any sort of like adopted parent or something like that. And again, I think it is her mother, just because Kuvira and her mother both have a kind of a beauty mark thing on one side of their face, obviously in different spots, but I think that's what they're meant to kind of note. We know you broke the vase, Kuvira, admit it. And she shouts, no, I didn't do anything. I want my toys. Her father says, you'll get them back when you start behaving. And they put her in her room. She says, let me out. And they say, it's for your own good. And she says, I'll show you. And then uses her earthbending to break the wall of her room down. And then she leaves, as her parents say, get back, Kuvira, get back here. And she says, make me. As this is when Korra arrives in. So this, I think, is, since the book has been out a few days now, I think this has been the scene that's got a lot of people thinking the most about things, because it's the only pages of backstory on Kuvira here. The interpretation is obviously that you are meant to view this scene in the past as being a very similar situation to what Kuvira in the present is going through, in that she's being accused, she's effectively put on trial for something here. In one situation, you know she did it. In this situation, we don't know if she did it or not. But because there's only a few characters involved, it seems potentially likely that she did do it. And the question is obviously, if she did do it and is lying about it, how does she deal with the punishment for it? And in the past, she ran away from it and didn't take the responsibility. And then, especially if this is meant to be the scene where like this is potentially her fully running away. Her parents didn't actually like abandon her. She left because of this. Again, it's unclear if this is meant to be the scene where she leaves and this directly results in her finding Su Yin and being taken in there, and potentially setting up some sort of a thing where it's a lie that she was abandoned and that it was just her actually just being a problematic child. I like that it's very thought-provoking. You don't know exactly what way to interpret it, but I like that it is meant to be the sort of duality of Kuvira in the past versus Kuvira in the present, and what is she going to do now that Korra has come to basically ask for her help? Is she going to try and take responsibility and resolve things, or will she run away like she did in the past? But Greg, what is your thoughts on this Kuvira backstory that we get here?
Yeah, no, I think this is definitely cool to see, just to get, anything on her past, which is something that we've been wanting for a while now. So yeah, I mean, the whole, how that sort of mirrors what's happening in her current time and how she's reflecting back on it definitely sort of makes you sort of wonder, just her sort of running away from her current problems here. And yeah, you don't really know if she caused, the vase to break or not, or if something's sort of just happened with her home family life. Like there's a lot of different ways that this could be sort of explained, which maybe we'll find out later on, or maybe I don't know, maybe we won't ever get sort of the full picture of this. Maybe we'll just sort of get the sort of like aftermath of this. But it's definitely something that I think is definitely is worth talking about and seeing how it definitely sort of develops. Just the fact that she was able to sort of do this, and I guess the fact that it was enough for her to sort of want to leave her home life here, and whether this is the time that she leaves for good or comes back is still a pretty sort of serious sort of incident.
Yeah, this is interesting because we know we're going to get more backstory. I think Michelle Wong on Twitter posted some kind of work in progress stuff from, I think at the time it would have been part 2, but it could be part 3, and it shows this Kuvira and she appears to be in the back of some sort of a cart or something like that, like she's
Mm-hmm.
like on the move basically, so that it isn't just a case of like this is some minor thing, she ran off and came back. It seems she actually is properly running away here, and I suppose the question is, how do we get to the point where she is able to say that my parents abandoned me? Again, that's specifically what she says. It's I was cast aside by my own parents, and this scene very clearly isn't that. Like, okay, she can be a bit upset that her parents are being strict on her, but if she did break it, it's kind of like, okay, she's getting some sort of a punishment, but what is happening here? And I suppose this could be some sort of a thing where like she runs away and maybe after a while finds her way back, and maybe her parents have like moved on in some way and she considers that them leaving, and I'm not really sure, but it's definitely interesting to talk about. There's probably not enough here to come up with any proper theories just yet, but it's at the very least interesting. Next, so we get Korra arriving, and Kuvira says, "I had a feeling you were going to be my first visitor. I need your help. Tell me about Commander Guan." And this is where she reveals, "Were you aware that he and his troops never surrendered?" Kuvira is shocked by this and says, "Guan is a cunning strategist with a keen mind. I put him in charge of my southern forces because I knew he could keep that region in line." Korra says, "I'm worried he's going to try and derail the upcoming elections. How big of a threat do you think he is?" She says, "If Guan hasn't surrendered by now, then that means he's plotting something. I treat him like a barrel of blasting jelly with a very short fuse. If you were in my position, how would you deal with him? I'd take someone with me who Guan respects, someone who can reason with him and bring him into line." And Korra's like, "You want me to bring you?" Guan's not going to roll over just because the Avatar asks him to, but if I meet with him face to face, I guarantee I could convince him to concede defeat. Then you and King Wu can carry on with your little election. Korra says, "Thanks for the info, but I can handle Guan without you." But Kuvira says, "Think it over. I'll be here when you need me," and you will. So, again, very, very interesting in that, you know, you have a Kuvira who's willing to talk here, but isn't exactly overly apologetic, remorseful about things. She's giving Korra the information that she needs, but still has a certain confidence that you almost think is like, it's not really the best approach to have in the position that she's in, but this is the character who Kuvira is, and she sees, I suppose, this as her way to potentially make things right. Like, she doesn't have to put in this much effort to try and fully get everyone to surrender, so to some degree her reaction to, I suppose, contemplating her past is to do what she potentially didn't do in the past and actually confront things this time. But at the same time, is she using this as just a way to get out of prison, basically? Who knows? But what are your thoughts on the Korra and Kuvira conversation?
Yeah, no, her character by default doesn't have a lot of sort of like humility, or maybe you could say that stems to sort of responsibility. But definitely like like she makes note of your little election. So clearly she thinks that what the Avatar, what the Earth King is currently doing isn't maybe sort of the best way of doing things. But she is at least attempting to sort of, maybe for her own benefit, of course, but to sort of deal with the situation in hand here. So, it's definitely an interesting way that she, I don't know, just the way that she, conversates with everyone despite, what she has done and her sort of opinions on things. She does a similar thing later on as well. So, I don't know, it's definitely an interesting way of, I guess, seeing how she's going to be, integrated with our group, or at least for this sort of incident here.
Mm-hmm. Next couple of pages are basically just Commander Guan rallying his troops just before he heads out to the town of Geylang. He's obviously more on the outskirts here in the re-education camp. He talks about they'll bring the Earth King to his knees, they'll force the Avatar to yield, he'll never abandon them. This is where the title of the book basically comes up. The Earth Empire will rise from the ruins of defeat, become more powerful than before, and it's clear that he has the full support of his troops. And his army, while not massive, seems very organized. They have like mech suits, they have tanks, kind of like jeep-like things, and obviously this kind of full re-education camp, which is more or less like a fortress. So, not too much to say other than that. I suppose the charismatic side of Guan is beginning to come out here. He has the loyalty of the remnants of the Earth Empire is the main thing to say, and that his ultimate goal is that he wants the Avatar to yield and the Earth King to yield as well. So that's important to keep in mind. But the cleverness of his plan hasn't come out just yet. But any thoughts on this speech from Guan?
Not too much. I mean, I think it's sort of, it seems like a more of a sort of like a commander sort of, type speech rather than sort of like a real sort of like aspiring speech, or at least that's how it sort of comes across to me. It doesn't seem like it's anything, I guess, sort of overly charismatic. I mean, his troops definitely seem to be with him, but with, figuring out how he actually sort of, got his troops to actually operate on the level that they're currently operating, it sort of makes you wonder how much of a sort of like, inspiring leader, like we always sort of compare to Kuvira and her sort of, forces and getting everyone to work behind her. So I don't know. I guess I kind of wonder about that dynamic within his forces, how that truly works. But other than that, I think it definitely seems like a sizable sort of force. Like it could definitely cause some issue if they wanted to go to more sort of violent way of dealing with things. But it definitely seems like he definitely has some ideas of strategy when it comes to doing things.
Mm-hmm. Next scene, we cut to, I suppose, the fan service section of the book here in the steam baths. We see everyone's here because Wu had to have a steam bath, so they have their full-on meeting with like Julie and everyone in here. This is basically they find out that Guan's on the move. Wu panics a little bit. Mako proposes, "What about the United Forces? The pressure could cause them to back off." Julie just says, "No, I'll only deploy them if there's no other option. I don't want to incite another war." Wu says they have to do it peacefully. And then Korra prepares everyone for what she's about to suggest and says, Asami knows immediately, "I assume it's got something to do with whatever Kuvira told you." Everyone is kind of shocked. "You even met with her? What's going on here?" And she says, "Yes, I wanted her take on how to handle Guan. That she's our best chance to get the holdouts to surrender. So I'm thinking, what if we brought Kuvira with us?" And Asami is kind of shocked by this and says, "I told you I didn't want to be in the same room as her, and now you expect us to welcome her to the team." Korra says, "I wasn't crazy about the idea at first either, and I'm not saying Kuvira would be part of the team, but with her help we can avoid another all-out battle and put an end to the Earth Empire once and for all." And then this is where I suppose everyone gives their thoughts on Kuvira. Bolin says, "But Kuvira's the worst. She's threatened my life more than once." Mako says, "I almost lost my arm taking out her Mecha Giant's engine." Julie says that she nearly destroyed Republic City. Asami says, "She was our enemy. She killed my father." And Wu says, "And let's not forget, she ruined my coronation." And then he notes that that wasn't particularly important, and it was not really on the same level of everyone else's. But Korra says, "I know everyone has hurt us. Kuvira has hurt us all terribly, but before she was our enemy, Kuvira was our ally. She was the captain of Sue's guard and helped us fight Zahir in the Red Lotus. And there's part of me that still feels like I still owe her for saving my father's life at Lahima's Peak." Asami says, "The problem is we don't know which version of Kuvira is going to show up if we bring her with us." And this is where kind of, I suppose, Korra argues a little bit for Kuvira's side. Kuvira thought she had died when we were blasted into the spirit world. It was a huge wake-up call for her. When I visited her in prison, I could tell that she's still broken. I think she really wants to redeem herself in the eyes of the world and her people. I say we give her that chance." Bolin says, "Kuvira has a special talent for getting people to do things they don't want to do. For once, we can use that skill to our advantage." And then this basically, Korra has sort of convinced everyone they will support her on this. And Julie just says, "I'll sign an order for Kuvira's temporary release." And I suppose the idea here is that if this was Raiko still in charge, they wouldn't have got anywhere, but a casual conversation in the steam bath and Kuvira is going with them. I think it's an interesting scene. As you can see here, it is them all not liking Kuvira, not liking the idea, but Korra convincing them well enough that Kuvira is different now in some way, but there's still some worry about what exactly she's thinking. Full stop. But I definitely like the scene. Continuing on the thing from book four of everyone sort of noted the certain similarities between Korra and Kuvira, and that continuing here. She is the most sympathetic to Kuvira as we expected, and I think they're doing that pretty well. But what are your thoughts on this steam bath scene?
Yeah, no, I think the comparison point between Korra and Kuvira is definitely what they're making, full use of here. Just the fact that, Korra can sort of, understand to some degree what Kuvira is going through, or just sort of, the reasoning behind her doing things, even if they were done in sort of like the worst way here, is definitely, what's, enabled Korra at all to sort of, take any sort of advice from her, or just, Korra, just her development in general, just even her going to ask Kuvira, to get her opinion, I think, speaks a lot about the situation here. And, on the surface of things, it seems like it's something that could work because, like Bola notes, Kuvira definitely has the ability to sort of get people to do certain things, whether that's because of, her previous sort of standing or anything like that, is yet to be sort of find out here. But, I think, the conversation that they have here, everyone's sort of giving their opinions. I think it's definitely a nice sort of setup for things to come here. And just, the fact they are able to come to some agreement here, even if, most of them aren't really happy with, having Kuvira anywhere near any of them at all.
Yeah, I like that it's just kind of stated that most of them aren't like super happy about this, but it's not full on drama like we need to stop everything and
Mhm.
basically not be friends anymore over this. Um, so immediately we cut to Korra arriving at the prison by airship. She has the release order from Zhu Li, and she basically just escorts Kuvira on to the airship. And and we have Korra referring to the guards to Kuvira as the prisoner, and Kuvira is like, the prisoner. No need to be so formal. We're partners now. And Korra feels the need to set this straight. We might be working together, but we're not teammates. If you step out of line or do anything to harm my friends, I won't hesitate to take you down. Do we have an understanding? And Kuvira just smiles and says, of course, you're in charge. And she walks in, and we see that there's some Earth Kingdom guards in there. Naga growls at her. Pabu hisses at her. She gets some nasty looks here from Mako, Bolin, and Wu. And Asami greets her next to a giant metal kind of cage-like thing and says, "Step inside." So very, very frosty reception to Kavira's arrival, and Kavira says that won't be necessary. If I was planning to escape, I would have done it before I got on the ship. And Korra just says, if she makes one wrong move, I'll throw her in there myself, I promise. But Asami says, fine, but I'm not taking my eyes off her. Kuvira then just sits down casually and is like, nice to see you too, gentlemen, to the guys who are just staring at her. And yeah, you immediately get the awkwardness of this dynamic of, like, they rightfully have all this history with her, and she sits down as if, I apologize to all of you, so it should be fine now, right? Like she was with Sue, basically. And that's where most of the awkwardness comes from. It's like, just saying sorry isn't enough, and you get the impression she doesn't quite get that just yet, and again, they're sort of put off by how unnecessarily confident she needs to be in this situation, and they're unnerved by that. But Greg, what are your thoughts on Kuvira's arrival into the group here?
Yeah, no, she definitely, I don't know, it's if either she just doesn't see it or she doesn't want to see sort of the awkwardness or, everything that she's done before, she still thinks that her reasonings, outweigh any of the cost that is, caused or any of the harm that has caused any of our characters here. So it's definitely interesting. It's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of weird and kind of funny just to see her be so nonchalant about things here. But I don't know, it's definitely going to cause an interesting dynamic in the group for sure. Because it's interesting just to see our normal characters interact with her here, who's so on ends with everyone else. It's definitely a whole different ball game.
hmm So we get a page of them just arriving at Geylang, the actual town of Geylang. They note that Guan hasn't shown up just yet, um, and Kuvira says, Commander Guan will show up, and before he does, I need to get out of these rags and change and into something more presentable. Mako says, no way, but again, Korra's like, actually, she has a point. Guan might refuse to meet with us if we show up with Kuvira looking like a prisoner. Asami says, I have some extra clothes Kuvira can borrow, I'll go pick something out. And Korra goes off with Wu, and she says that she has a radio, and she takes Naga to bring them there. So that's basically what we briefly get here. So again, just the idea of Kuvira assuming, a little bit too much, command in the situation, and it's just like, not really being fully aware or acknowledging the situation she's in, and having, I suppose, too much of a voice in the situation here of just like she basically like asks for clothes here when like she doesn't really need to, and more or less forces Korra to have to make the argument for her. But again, I like the dynamic of just Kuvira assuming a bit too much of the situation. But any thoughts on this page?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think her idea of it isn't, such a bad thing per se to sort of not be in this sort of attire when meeting someone else that you're trying to convince of something else. Is just, the way that she goes about it, either assuming too much command or just her tone, her cadence of how she actually says things just doesn't, it's not going to settle right. Like, I'm sure they would have, Mako would have still denied it anyway, regardless of how she asked it. But, it could have lessened, the sentence of her sort of asking for these clothes because of this sort of situation if she would have went about it a different way.
hmm So they arrive at Geylang City Hall. They're shown that this is where the voting is going to take place. Everything's in order. And he's like, the sweet smell of democracy. And there's pictures up of the two people running for governor. And it's noted that their names are Chief Magistrates Ling and Bok. They're two of Geylang's finest government officials, and either one will make an excellent governor. And they note that, of course, like, I don't know how the voters are ever going to be able to decide. Let's go. And they basically just, Wu and Korra just have this conversation about the fact that, like, this isn't really what we expected out of the elections, of basically just two previous politicians from the previous way things are just running against each other. Nothing's really going to change if this is just how it is, like, all over the place. He just, Wu notes that I was imagining candidates with a little more vim and vigor, some new political blood, not just keeping the outdated Earth Kingdom bureaucracy. Of course, it's like, I know it's disappointing. It's only the first election. It's not going to be perfect. It took the United Republic a long time to iron out its political kinks. And Wu says, but if those are the only candidates, what's the point in even having a vote? Whoever wins, nothing is going to change. Geylang will always be governed the same as it's always been. So yeah, those two pages, I think it's an interesting conversation, because it's kind of pointing out, like, as we're about to find out, like, what Guan's plan is and stuff like that, that there is this sense of, if they're basically then figuring out that they need to, on a bigger picture, try and get some more, I suppose, interesting people to run for election, and not just have previous politicians just kind of step in and things be the exact same. I like that there's at least a look at, like, a bigger picture, beyond just, I suppose, the Geylang focus that this book seems to have, and I assume will be focused on for most of the series. But Greg, what are your thoughts on this? I suppose the first, I suppose, downside potentially to doing things like this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess, with how long things have been the same, it's not too surprising that the first sort of people that would throw their hands into running things would be people who are already sort of used to. It doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't seem like just because you're saying that there's going to be democracy, for such a country that hasn't known what that actually is in any sort of sense, it might not be normal for any sort of, normal sort of citizen to sort of realize that they can sort of run for office. But, I think it's interesting just sort of how Wu sort of notes this. He is, he's definitely sort of aware of, the situation that's going on here. And, him being, I guess, one of the younger characters and just being, his normal sort of different sort of self definitely sort of realizes this. So it's definitely, something of note, something of his sort of maturity in general, that sort of comes out in this sort of situation here, even though they do make that little joke of the place stinking up and him being the one that did it.
Yeah. And I suppose that's where, like, even stuff like I kind of almost joked about earlier on of, like, maybe Bolin will run in one of these races is kind of like, actually, that might be okay, in that, like, he'll be, like, the idealistic candidate, but we know he kind of cares about people. The part when he was with the Earth Empire of, like, the kind of humanitarian aid is something he seemed to care about, so he definitely put the people first, especially given, like, his family's history with embossing say and stuff. So it's and the fact that, like, him in a political race actually you can see working because he has that sort of like almost like wrestling kind of personality that will kind of draw people towards him when they're basically saying everyone else is super boring, and we know that, like, he would have the support of people like who know him for pro bending all over the place, and then the movers. So, like, he'd be this, like, a crazy celebrity kind of person, and then who knows, they might go into some political stuff with him, but they haven't really leaned towards saying that just yet, but it's always there on the table. Um, so yeah, as Wu and Korra are discussing this, this is when they notice that Commander Guan has arrived. So he brings his army right into the city, and okay, here's where the confrontation is going to happen. But we cut to Kuvira finishing getting changed, and we see that she says, "I can't tell you how good it feels to be out of those shackles." And Asami says, "Don't get too comfortable. You'll be back in them soon enough." And then Kuvira out of nowhere just says, "It must be challenging for you to be being the Avatar's girlfriend." And she says, "Well, you could be back in Republic City running your business or inventing another awesome piece of machinery. Instead, you're stuck here in a bathroom guarding me." Asami just says, "I'm exactly where I want to be, protecting Korra from you. So whatever little game you're playing, it's not going to work. You're not going to drive a wedge between me and Korra." Kuvira just says, "I'm not playing any games. I'm genuinely impressed by the loyalty all three of you have to Korra and each other. I never had that in my life." Bolin actually speaks up and says, "That's because you've always pushed people away." And what do you know about it, Bolin? Opal told me that when you two were growing up, she always tried to be your friend, but you didn't want anything to do with her. And she says, "Don't believe everything your girlfriend tells you. Opal and I may have lived under the same roof, but we had very different experiences being raised by Sue. You and everyone else have me pegged wrong. I'm not the same person I was when I was leading the Earth Empire. I've changed." And Asami just says, "I believe that people can redeem themselves, but no one changes overnight." And that's when Korra contacts Mako over the radio and says that he's just rolled into town. Get Kuvira over here now. So this is another very interesting scene here because, you know, on one hand it's like, okay, yeah, Kuvira is sort of being sincere about the loyalty thing, but, like, the way she said it of, like, you're here in the bathroom guarding me for Korra instead of doing all this other stuff, like, how was Asami meant to interpret it? And again, that's just the sort of cutting personality in a way that Kuvira has at this point. I like Asami being very forceful with her, of just being like, "I know exactly what you're trying to do here. I'm here." She's basically almost saying that, like, "I'm here to protect Korra from you because Korra has her guard down a little bit around you, so I'll, like, be the guard for her because she sees something in you." So I do like that dynamic that they have going on here. And then, yeah, I like Bolin being able to present the kind of Opal perspective. Of course, Opal would talk about, Kuvira's past, and I find that interesting in that, like, I think you can trust Opal with that, and that is an honest opinion on what happened. Of like, Opal tried to connect with her as a friend and potentially actually have her as a sister, but from Opal's perspective, I suppose the idea is that you know she pushed her away, and that's I suppose the telling situation here is because of potentially whatever happened with her parents. Is that why she never really got overly close to anyone because she was afraid of being, it being broken apart again? So very interesting. Also confirms here that they did all live under the same roof. There was some speculation about like, what if Sue just like supplied her with money and food, but she didn't actually live with them? This confirms that they all live in the same house together. So it very much was as close as possible to just she's another one of Sue's daughters type thing. But again, without going into any details, Kuvira says, I had a very different experience being raised by Sue. And then she says, I've changed, but we as the reader and all the other characters are just kind of like, how? Like, okay, we get you, it's possible to change, but what has actually changed? The only difference here is that she's not doing the great uniter thing anymore, and she's a little bit more easy to talk to, but she's still, herself. She's still sort of making a little bit of a mockery of the whole situation, and so on, not taking full responsibility for everything that's happened. And I think especially like she's talking to Asami here, it no mention of like, I'm sorry for what happened to your father or anything like that. And I think that's the most telling thing in all of this. Asami's already mentioned, I think, twice in the book so far, Kuvira killed my father. Not to her, but the readers were being reminded of that, and Kuvira, despite interacting with her, says nothing about it at all. Nothing really to Bolin either, and I think that's the very telling thing about all of this. And I do like as well that Asami, despite being very harsh here, at least says, I believe that people can redeem themselves. So that's interesting. But what are your thoughts on this interesting scene? I think this is probably, outside of the trial, probably the big scene in a way for Kuvira, just what they bring up here.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely is one of the more important scenes with her just sort of discussing, what she has sort of, had to deal with and how, at least from her perspective, how she's actually sort of seen things. It definitely makes you wonder, what side of the story is more truthful or what parts of the story. Because, I mean, from seeing from what, Opal and her character, you definitely would be, like you said, led to sort of believe what she said, but we don't know sort of what the other sort of circumstances of, Kuvira living with Sue and being raised by her, as sort of, maybe her, another daughter, but definitely, not directly her daughter, how that sort of, perspective, sort of shift things. So, maybe there was sort of Opal reaching out, but maybe there was something that, maybe Kuvira and Sue, or something that Sue told Kuvira of, as far as, interacting with her own, direct children. So there's a lot of different things that could sort of play out here, and just, it doesn't, none of this ever helps by how, Kuvira just sort of acts in general, as far as her just responses back to any of these sort of statements that are sort of being said here. So I don't know. It makes me, I don't know. I sort of wonder if we would have got more of a idea of Kuvira's sort of character before she became the Great Uniter and everything, how that would have compared to how we see her now as a character. Like, how did she actually act when she was just sort of the guard? Even if, at that point there had already been a rift between her and Sue, and just, the whole Earth Kingdom sort of thing just sort of being the sort of tipping point of things. I don't know. I really wonder on her personality beforehand, and if we'll ever sort of get that, or if it'll all be sort of after the fact.
Mm. Yeah, because like we have like two or three scenes with her from like book three, which is prior to all of this happening, and I don't think you can get a ton out of it. I suppose the one bit you'd maybe point to is like Kavir asked to go with her in the finale,
Yeah.
basically be involved in the big battle, and Suyin just says no, stay with the injured. We'll come back for you then. But I think Kavira just kind of nods, and there's maybe a slight sense of maybe she wants to maybe argue about it, but she accepts the order, and that's it. Um, and then she's obviously there to save Tonrog when he falls. So it's like Korra said, her being the ally in all of that, and the fact that she was Zhao captain of the guard as well is a kind of telling situation as well. It doesn't seem like there was any like obvious like conflict then and there. So I suppose again this scene I suppose doubles down on the fact that Kuvira and Sue is the key dynamic. That the relationship with the others is probably more informed by her relationship with Sue. So if she doesn't have a great relationship with Opal, it's not necessarily because of anything specific with Opal and Kuvira. It's the relationship with Sue that affects everything else. Which I think then obviously begs the question of like, how did the whole Batard Junior relationship come about, and what's going on there? Because again, noticeably, he is not mentioned. He's mentioned at the start of this book, but we don't see him, so we get no new Batard Junior content or references to that dynamic. But I suppose we can discuss that later on. So yeah, so this is where Korra. Next up is where Korra and Guan meet. So he says, the famous Avatar Korra, at last we meet. What brings you to Geylang? And she says, as you're aware, the Earth Empire's rule has ended. I'm here to make sure you and your troops surrender peacefully. And he says, then I'm afraid you've traveled a long way for nothing. I have other plans. And Korra says, I figured you would say that. That's why I brought along someone who can help you see things a little differently. And this is when he is shocked to see Kuvira arriving, being driven there by Asami and the others. And the soldiers begin to discuss among themselves, is that really Kuvira? What's she doing here? And Asami just says, you say you've changed, now's your chance to prove it. And Kuvira just says that I will. And he says, so the Great Uniter is now doing the Avatar's bidding. Korra is about to step in. She says, listen, pal. But Kuvira just says, I have this under control. If you must know, it was actually my idea to come. I wanted to handle the situation personally, out of respect to you and to everyone who has served the Earth Empire with honor. Don't talk to me about honor. You disgraced the Empire by giving up the fight in Republic City. No one regrets the demise of the Earth Empire as much as I do. I'm proud of all of our achievements and everything we did to modernize the kingdom. People will be enjoying the benefits of what we did for years to come, but we can't allow our personal feelings to obscure reality. Our great experiment has come to an end. He says, no, it's only beginning. And he says, there's so much more progress to be made, and why should others get to reap the rewards of everything the Earth Empire accomplished? I'm sure that there's part of you that wishes you hadn't stood down, that wants to see how far we can take things. Kuvira says, I've seen what lies at the end of that path, death and destruction. I stand by my decision, Commander, and it doesn't change the fact that the Earth Empire was defeated. He says, no, you were defeated. My soldiers and I are still standing. She says, yet you have no real power. Your force is a fraction of what the Earth Empire once was. You've offered these men and women false hope that the Earth Empire has a future. It doesn't. It continues on a little bit after this, but I think we should stop here to discuss this first section. And it's definitely interesting in that, to a degree, it is Kuvira having to do a little bit of acting to get across the idea that she's not a prisoner. So that's why I think this is perhaps a scene where you can kind of let it go that she sort of steps in over Korra, because she has to come across as being an authority figure. But what she says is actually very interesting in that, like, she says, people will be enjoying the benefits of what we did for years to come. She's sort of looking at the positives of things, of just like, okay, we did this, we accomplished something, but it's come to an end. We can't let hopes get in the way of the fact that we accomplished just this and we kind of fell a little bit short. And then I think the most interesting thing in all of this is that she says, I've seen what lies at the end of that path, death and destruction. And you're kind of thinking, what's that about? And I assume it is referencing what Korra said earlier on, how she feels about the fact that, as far as she was aware, she was basically killed by that spirit beam thing. That Korra stepped in, did this impossible thing, displayed this incredible power, and she ended up in the spirit world, and she has no explanation for that. And I suppose it's her sort of in a way reflecting on the fact that, like, when you take things too far, like Guan is now threatening to, you become, you focus more on death and destruction than anything else, which was, I suppose, Kuvira's mistake in the end, of focusing too much on that spirit weapon, on the Colossus, and that being the kind of downfall. She wasn't happy with what she did accomplish, and she was offered a bunch of like counter agreements that she refused, and she took it too far, was nearly killed, if not for Korra. At least that's my interpretation of it. But Greg, what's your thoughts on this Guan and Kuvira conversation?
Yeah, no, I think this is definitely very interesting of Kuvir, sort of she's still pretty consistent in her message of, being proud of what they've done, that they have, worked to modernize the whole Earth Kingdom. They have, made progress as far as just the nation in general, since, out of all the nations from what we know of, they definitely are the ones that are probably the steeped most in sort of the history that they have, just the whole idea of the monarchy and that sort of, really sort of leading all the ideas, even if, there are other nations that do have the same sort of ruling structure as far as, just general sort of progress. It definitely seems like the Earth Kingdom hasn't quite been, sort of as innovative as some of the other ones here. So, she's definitely making point of that is what they did, and that is probably, the best thing that has happened for the Earth Kingdom. But, the way that she's trying to sort of, convince Guan about this, it's definitely not coming across as, much as she might have hoped. And, that's probably just due to her sort of defeat and just sort of how, Guam is sort of taking this as far as, her honor and how, he views, how things should have gone out. And, sort of the next couple of pages, you see sort of how, he would have, taken things to the end here. So it's definitely, she's trying to sort of, make her peace here with everything that she has done and try to make up for it. But it doesn't, she's had, some realization that she's not quite able to sort of describe here, which I think is why, this doesn't sort of turn out quite as well as she might have hoped.
Yeah, and there's also sort of a sense that she's almost like a little bit like insulted by the fact that he's trying to continue things on with them at only a fraction of their strength, that it's kind of almost like an insult to what they had accomplished already to think that they can do even more than she did with such a small amount of people. And but again, there's a lot of room for interpretation here, but the scene does continue on. She speaks to the soldiers and says, "I'm giving you one final command. Surrender to King Wu and the Avatar and you'll all be dealt with fairly." They just say, "All hail the Earth Empire, all hail Commander Guan." And she accepts that, okay, they're loyal to him. So she says, "Then I challenge you to a fight one-on-one. If I beat you, then you and your troops will surrender immediately." And he says, "That ploy might have worked on the Avatar back in Zaofu, but I'm not foolish enough to fall for it. You may have struck fear into your followers once, but now we see you for what you really are, a spineless coward." And she says, "If you won't give up willingly, then I'll make you yield," as she earthbends at him and starts to fight herself. This shocks everyone. Korra's like, "Kuvira, stand down." And she says, "Not until Guan does," as she metal bends the metal that's on the kind of things around his neck. And she says, "Surrender." And he says, "Never. I'd rather die a martyr than live as a traitor." And Korra's about to jump into action when suddenly Kuvira is electrocuted out of nowhere, and it's revealed that Asami has pressed a switch and that the belt that she gave Kuvira is actually an electrode belt. So that's what shocked Kuvira, Asami being very, very cautious in all of this. Kuvira giving some sense of freedom, but Asami had accounted for that. And Korra thanks her for this as the brothers take Kuvira, who's obviously injured by this, away, and they take her back to the airship. And this is when the reveal comes out. Korra goes to confront Guan and says, "I won't let you fear in Geylangs election." And he says, "You misunderstand. I didn't come here to stop the democratic process. I came to take part in it." And he says, "Kuvira's right. The Earth Empire is no real power. It never did, really. The world has never viewed us as a legitimate nation, but I'm going to change that. Mayor Ree, I am officially declaring my candidacy for governor of Geylang. Here's my paperwork." And it's revealed that it's all in order, because the way they set it up, it was an open election. So I suppose once you fill out the right documents, you can actually run for whatever state. And he says, "Soon the Earth Empire will have candidates in every state, and once we're in power, no one will be able to question our right to rule." and this is the big kind of shock turning point. They didn't expect what remains of the Earth Empire to go about things using, I suppose, the system that they're setting up. So I thought the way they did this and gradually revealed it was a pretty nice twist of just him in the end actually being like, actually, yeah, what Kuvira said was true, but come the end of the elections, it'll just be the Earth Empire, and effectively he's trying to accomplish the Earth Empire in the right way, not by conquering places or anything like that, but by getting elected in every state basically to control the entire Earth Kingdom. So very, very interesting reveal here that effectively, how do the good characters here counter this when he's applied legally to be part of this? So very thought-provoking stuff. But what are your thoughts on this reveal coming out here, as well as Kuvira's attack on Guan?
Yeah, no, it is definitely very, they've mentioned that he is sort of like a cunning sort of strategist. So the fact that he's sort of using the system that they have in place to achieve his end goal, which will be, pretty much the exact same thing as what they had before, it's just sort of, it's a nice touch on seeing how this work. And, of course, he probably could have said this before, but he definitely was sort of probably egging Kuvira on and just sort of not he definitely doesn't agree with the way that she sort of went about things, but he definitely has enough sense in him to sort of realize that going by force, regardless of how much sort of army that he has behind him, isn't going to lead him in the right sort of way here. So the fact that he's able to sort of figure that out and sort of also get Kuvira out of the picture as well by sort of putting her in this sort of awkward situation here where she has to sort of basically attack him directly, and her personality definitely seems like that's not something that seems so out of character that she would actually do here. She's trying to do, what she thinks is the right thing, and she might have actually gone through with it if it wasn't for the electrode belt that Asami had put on her, which I think is it's definitely a cool thing, and it seems like something that Asami would do. I mean, they sort of make note of, her belt specifically in a couple earlier scenes, just sort of it being sort of, it just sort of stands out in the frame, which I think is definitely a nice touch with how they sort of led into this if you weren't sort of paying attention to it. But no, I think it's definitely one of the interesting sort of highlight scenes of this actual book here. It's not, it's not such a sort of action heavy book, but when you do see it, it definitely has its moments.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because I suppose it shows the lengths that Kuvira was willing to go through to fully end the Earth Empire in a way. And I
Hmm.
suppose from her perspective, it's kind of like, oh yeah, yeah, I killed someone, but I did it for you to redeem myself, even though it like makes her look even worse. And she still, to a degree, probably doesn't quite get it. And yeah, I like Asami like accounting for the fact that Kuvira was going to do something like that. And then yeah, I suppose confirming to us that like the book's kind of been very up and down about like Guan. Are you meant to interpret him as being the master strategist, or is he just going to be the take it by force, screaming out a speech commander guy? And ultimately, it's, I suppose, a little bit of both, but more on the intelligence side of things, in that he lets them act first, and it makes him look better coming out of this. That sure, he showed up with his complete forces, but like they attacked him first, and he was doing things legally. So, he got one over on them this first time, and we'll see how they kind of respond here. So, next scene we see Kuvira is put in the kind of metal cage thing, and Korra says, "I locked you up so you don't try something stupid again, like provoking an army." And that's where they explain to her for the first time he's planning to take over politically, not militarily. And they discuss what should they do in this case. Mako's kind of like, should we call off the vote? Wu's like, we can't really do that. Asami's like, do we just sit back and hope one of the other candidates wins? And Korra's like, I wouldn't hold my breath. They're not exactly inspiring. And this is when Kuvira says, if you want to defeat Guan, you have to beat him at his own game. Find a candidate to run against him, someone who's popular enough to win. And that's what they decide on. Who are they going to find on such short notice? And Korra jumps into the action and is like, I know the perfect person. Toph. She's a legend. Everyone loves her. Geylang is her hometown, and she hates the Earth Empire. She definitely bring a unique governing style to the Earth Kingdom. They all more or less agree with this, but Bolin, who was obviously the last one to see her pretty much of this group, says, "One itsy bitsy problem. Last time I saw her, she didn't seem too involved in getting involved with world affairs. Then we'll just have to convince her," is what Korra says very simply. So, all very, very interesting here. The result of this being that this, I suppose, confirms to us the character that was mentioned on the part 2 description. I think everyone said it was going to be Sue, but it's actually Toph. Now, they could, once we get into the specifics, change that, but right now, Korra is putting her hopes on the fact that Toph, as the kind of hometown legend, one of the heroes of the world, basically, is going to, step in, run for election, and win through raw popularity, pure celebrity, basically. It's on one hand like the plan that they need because of the simplicity, but like, what are Toph's political views? What would she run her campaign on? That's what we don't know, but at this point, that's what they need to do. But Greg, what are your thoughts on this? Their plan, I suppose, very vague plan here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, Korra seems very sort of like hopeful about this sort of situation where Bowen sort of, mentions how she's not sort of so into dealing with anything with the world. Like she seems to want to, stay sort of a recluse. So I don't know. It makes me wonder if Korra sort of just forgot how Toph sort of acts in most, instances, from her training that she did go through with her. So I don't know. It's interesting that, I mean, it makes sense because she is from the area. So from that perspective, I can see why, but I can definitely see this not. I mean, I can see Toph being involved with this sort of situation in general, just because it seems like it's they've already hinted at it enough that she's going to be involved in it in some capacity. But I could definitely see, even if Toph is involved, her being, somehow sort of grooming whoever is actually going to be the real sort of candidate, who, maybe is from their group, maybe is from outside their group. Maybe I could see her fulfilling that role, just from sheer sort of how she interacts and how she sort of pushes people rather than her actually sort of doing it herself. I mean, I don't know. Toph could be a cool ruler, and she definitely would be different and unique from anything that we have seen before, because we know how Toph deals with authority. So that would be interesting just to see how she would act just in that sort of position in general. But I don't know. It's definitely interesting. I can see it going a couple of different ways. I'm not sure I can really see Toph being the end result of this sort of election, but I guess who knows really.
hmm So we last 2 pages of the book, we're back with Guan and Shang in the re-education camp. He says to her, "You should have seen Kuvira, Dr. Shang. She's no longer the commanding woman who inspired us all. The Avatar's influence has clearly corrupted her mind." Shang says, "Then perhaps we need to recalibrate it for her. Perhaps, but at the moment we have an election to prepare for. You mentioned the first campaign recruits have arrived. Right through here, sir. You'll be pleased to hear that they're responding quite well to our messaging. Excellent. Cliffhanger ending to the book, last page. Shang says, 'A vote for Commander Guan is a vote for progress and prosperity. Go with Guan.' And the 3 people who are all hooked up to these machines, all together in unison, say, 'A vote for Commander Guan is a vote for progress and prosperity. Go with Guan.' So yeah, this is complete. There is no war within the walls, Judy situation here, but with technology this time. And I suppose this is I suppose, in a way, I suppose it's the retroactive reveal of what they do at the re-education camps, but perhaps taken to the next level of just, it is full-on brainwashing now at this point. This also confirms what this terrifying new technology is going to be in part 2, about how he's going to cement his win, because even though he's a candidate, he knows he's not going to be a immediately liked candidate because of the Earth Empire connection. But if they get enough people convinced like this, they're going to win everywhere. So I think it's an effective kind of cliffhanger ending of throughout the whole thing, like doing all of this. And I love the hypocrisy of the villain here, in that like he's criticizing Korra and Kuvira of like, the Avatar's influence has clearly corrupted her mind, and what does he do in the next page is like corrupt everyone's mind to win me the vote. That's just that's the sort of stuff you want from a good villain, I think, of just them to not think anything they're doing is wrong, but then a character who's not doing anything wrong is the one who's actually done something. But yeah, I like this gradual reveal, brainwashing through technology. That's how he's going to win it. I really like the ending. What are your thoughts on these last couple of pages?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely really interesting just to see how he's going to go about actually sort of getting these votes and how they're sort of, using this technology. I mean, whenever you have a doctor involved or any sort of science person involved in any sort of situation, below sort of the main sort of commanders, there's usually something interesting and intriguing sort of going on that sort of is sort of pushing them forward. So just from the beginning, where you sort of see the hint of, that they're doing, something very specific in this camp that probably the other camps aren't doing, it definitely makes it more intriguing. So the fact that, it takes the whole book and then you finally get sort of the reveal, I think it's definitely pretty cool. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how this plays out. How many people they actually sort of have to brainwash, or if it's something where they're not all sort of like brain sort of zombies. They actually they're able to sort of speak their own mind and convince other people, even if they have this sort of like subconscious message sort of like embedded in their minds. So it definitely definitely opens up a bunch of different possibilities, and just sort of the technological aspect of it and how that's going to play into things is definitely something to look forward to in the next couple of bucks.
So yeah, a few things to cover. We'll get into some speculation as well. I suppose the first thing is the art. We have Michelle Wong on art here. We've moved from Irene Coe to Michelle Wong. She got tons of praise when she was revealed, along with the information when this book was first announced. And I think that praise has continued over to the actual official release. I think everyone loves Michelle Wong's art. I think it's really, really good. I think it's definitely some of the best we've had. It feels like the show, but has its own, nice kind of subtle kind of touches to it as well. And I think it's just kind of the perfect sort of consistent art that these comics need. So, as long as Michelle Wong wants to do the books, I'm perfectly happy with that. So I think, for me, huge, huge praise for the art, definitely. But Greg, what are your thoughts on Michelle Wong's art?
Yeah, no, I think the art in the whole book is pretty good. I don't have any sort of issues with it. It definitely seems like it's pretty consistent throughout the whole book. It definitely, I guess it sort of has a stronger, sort of bolder feel than sort of what we've seen in the past books here. So it's just, I don't know. I guess it's probably more in line with what we're sort of used to sort of seeing from previous books, but it does have more of, I guess, sort of a grounded sort of feel to it, which I guess sort of makes sense with sort of the subject matter that we're going with here. It's not sort of as sort of, fantastical or anything like that. Like, we haven't really seen too much or anything of sort of the spiritual sort of aspect of things, other than seeing the spirit portal behind in a couple of different shots, which I think is pretty cool. That's always sort of like a point that gets sort of, noted in a couple sort of shots here. But no, I think the art definitely works pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few things like, we haven't really seen much bending because this wasn't really an action-centric book. So I am going to be interested to see how that works, like how she does fire bending, air bending, that sort of things. But the little bits and pieces here of like earth bending that we see, I think are pretty good. And I'm definitely excited to see where we go with that. Yeah, I suppose we'll just do final thoughts on part one, and then we'll get into some speculation. So, I suppose, Greg, overall, part one of our second Avatar comic series, what are your thoughts?
Overall, I think it's pretty positive. I think for the most part, I like pretty much everything that they're sort of going for here. I think it's definitely, it's interesting how they're doing. It's definitely, it doesn't seem, at least at this one, it's definitely not sort of action focused or anything like that. I mean, I guess sort of only sort of down sort of part that I would think about, and it's maybe not particularly with this book. It's just sort of, it is another political sort of campaign that we're sort of going through. It is sort of that process. It's definitely, it's different because it's the Earth Kingdom rather than Republic City, and sort of dealing with that sort of situation. But no, it is sort of something that we have seen before, even if it is taken a different way. And, this might actually be sort of the better way of actually going about it, which, I don't know if there's any way they sort of could have integrated that into sort of the first sort of series with that sort of idea behind it. But I don't know. It's pretty strong. It seems like it's going places. It has, our characters together, which is something that we always like to see. So I think it's definitely a good start to things. Whether it'll sort of stay as strong in the next couple of ones, I don't know, but I think it's definitely a good starting point.
Yeah, I think it's a really good start. I think it improves on I think everything that we kind of had an issue with Turf Wars of just the villain's better. I think the general plot is better. The main characters kind of interact a lot more. They're not being kind of held apart from each other. Whereas in Turf Wars, it felt like it was Korra and Asami on like an island over here, and then we'll touch in with the other characters whenever we need them. Here, it's just like this is the Team Avatar interactions we were sort of waiting for. It's kind of like the dynamic we have in the Avatar comics, but we're finally getting to see it in a Korra comic for the first time. In that, Bolin has something going on. Mako's always there to present the sort of cop perspective. Asami actually has a little bit more going on here by being the most anti-Kuvira and kind of protecting Korra, who's a little bit more supportive of Kuvira. So that dynamic actually works to give Asami, who we've always kind of criticized for not having much going on, giving her something. And yeah, like you say, I think it probably is the only like criticism, if I had one, is that like it is another political book where the result is just election. It's like election, election, election. That's what the core comics have been about so far. And as interesting as they're doing here, it is still a lot of explaining elections and who's running this time. This one I think is going to be better just because Turf Wars was just so clear cut about Raiko's an idiot, Zhu Li is the best person ever. We're only going to give you a handful of pages covering the election and that's it. Here it seems much more plot focused. They're already suggesting that there's like a bigger plot of like whenever we deal with Geylang, they have a plan to expand beyond that. I still sort of get the impression that the book they'll resolve the plot before we get out of Geylang, in that like I think it will just be a case of like we resolve the election in Geylang and then it will go smoothly afterwards, and we just have to deal with it here. And I think once the series focuses enough on Kuvira, on Sue in part 2 and 3, and gives us a satisfying conclusion, or just development on that front, it's going to be good. Because it's only an introduction here. Like we only get 2 pages of backstory and a couple of hints in other scenes with Kuvira. But if they do even in any amount more to get close to say like Ursa's portrayal in The Search, I think this could be a really, really, really high quality series. Once they give that important focus, because by the end of this, I assume they have to confirm to us what's going on with Kuvira, what her punishment is, go back to the trial, and acknowledge that you helped in this situation. Here's what we're doing because of that, and so on. You probably have to do something with Bolin as before the end of the series, and I think by the end of this as well, it'll leave the series in a place where, okay, elections are kind of done. Like we don't need to focus multiple books on just seeing this state elect people, this state elect people. Even though I know they say that within a year it's going to happen, so it sort of probably will be a long-term storytelling thing going on in the background. It at least kind of gives our characters a chance. Like we don't need to be dealing with the politics of Republic City or the Earth Kingdom. We can maybe see what's going on in the Fire Nation, like so many people want to see. But yeah, so that's our thoughts on part 1. So let's get into at least a little bit of speculation about part 2. So the description that we have for part 2 says, what will it take to stop a war? King Wu's dreams of peacefully transitioning the Earth Kingdom into a democracy are in danger when Commander Guan throws his political hat into the ring, hoping to subvert the new system from the inside out. But playing fair was never part of his plan. Guan and Dr. Shang are using terrifying new technology to cement Guan's win. In a desperate attempt to save the Earth Kingdom from falling back into the dark days of conquest and empire, Korra and Kuvira convince an old friend to return and take the former commander on in the polls, but will it be enough? What's interesting now, having the full context for part 1, part 2 is literally just like a spoiler for the second half of part 1, in probably the most like egregious way we've seen so far. The new dynamic, I think, is just that they specifically note Korra and Kuvira are going to convince an old friend to return, and we now know that the old friend is Toph. So I think the interesting thing, the dynamic there is Kuvira will probably get to interact with Toph more than she did in the series. And I think that's going to be a very, very interesting one because Toph was able to help Korra at like her worst time. And if you take it that like Kuvira is in this sort of kind of crossroads, Toph could actually be the one to help Kuvira in some way in dealing with what she's dealing with. Because, Toph tends to give respect to people who are especially strong earthbenders, so Kuvira's right up there. As much as Toph has reason to dislike Kuvira, I think Toph can admire some aspects of Kuvira's personality, so I am interested to see where exactly they go with that. I definitely could see something like that, and then Su Yin's also on the cover, so she's there somewhere in this. So yeah, once we get Kuvira interacting with Toph and Su, I think this part two should be very, very interesting. But what are your thoughts going into part two based on the description and now what we know from part one?
Yeah, no, I think that new dynamic of all these characters sort of interacting, Toph, Kuvira, Korra, Sue, all of them that are on the cover of the next one, I think is definitely probably the most sort of intriguing part, and just sort of how they're going to get Toph, I guess, to some level to interact with this political race here. And, clearly there's going to be some sort of external forces that are sort of pushing things in Guam's, sort of favor here. So how do they sort of combat that? Is there something, something that Kuvira specifically has to do, just with based off of what she's, wearing in the cover, sort of, how is she actually going to go about sort of helping this? I mean, I'm guessing they eventually sort of let her back out of sort of her temporary prison that they have her in the airship now. So clearly she's going to be interacting with them in some other sort of capacity here. So I think that's definitely it's definitely sort of intriguing. There's definitely going to be more sort of, I'm guessing, more direct sort of conflict with the with whatever sort of forces that are at play in the second book. So it definitely seems it's making it more sort of interesting, and sort of how they're going to go about sort of the whole candidacy of this sort of election.
Yeah, Kuvira's outfit is an interesting discussion topic. She's wearing what seems to just be a standard Earth Empire soldier uniform, which obviously would mean that she's either infiltrating or undercover in Guan's forces, or, like the last couple of pages of the book seem to suggest, at some point they try to recalibrate or re-educate Kuvira and they get her in that way or something like that. Or else the good characters like fake her going through that progress to get her inside as like some way to do things. I'm not entirely sure. Like they could go a lot of different directions. Because otherwise, like the impression you'd get is like the preview basically says Korra and Kuvira go to the swamp to talk to Toph, and how does that eventually lead to Kuvira wearing one of these uniforms and in Geylang and all this other stuff happening? There's definitely some missing stuff there, but it means that probably a decent amount happens in the book at the very least. So that's definitely interesting. I suppose Bolin has a little bit of an arc going on. We talked about it a little bit over the course of the book. Where do you think they're going with this over the course of the story? There's still two parts left. I assume they'll give some resolution to this. I realistically get the impression he won't be Julie's assistant by the end of things, and him going into politics, I think it's at least an option in that he has some of the skills that you think would fit it. Depending on what state, if any, he like decides on, like that's something he could do. Beyond that, I really am not sure what to make of it, because he just seems like such a talented character otherwise, that it's a weird arc to just kind of have be like he doesn't exactly know what he wants to do while everyone else around him does. But what are your thoughts on Bolin's arc?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he could definitely go a number of different ways, as you said. I mean, him being, I don't know, seemingly, at least at the current time, politically sort of motivated in sort of his current job definitely, sort of leads you to be the idea that he could, sort of be involved in one of these sort of elections. I mean, he's part of the team here. Maybe he won't be for this specific location, but I mean, for him to do it in another location, it could be something that I could see. But I don't know. I mean, he's also quite sort of like a young character too, as well. So that might, I don't know, being in that sort of position at that age might not be something that he necessarily, wants the responsibility of actually doing, since it is a pretty sort of high profile thing. So I don't know. He definitely has a number of different ways that he can go about things. But I don't know. I'm interested in just to see him sort of interact with just sort of the group as sort of a whole. I think that's definitely going to be an interesting sort of aspect, just seeing him interact with more with Toph and just Kuvira sort of directly with everything they sort of had before. Because I mean, even if he did run for one of the positions, I mean, he also was part of the Earth Empire, so that definitely has to be sort of factor into things as well. And we're assuming he's not going to use any sort of like underhanded methods as we see Guan is using here. So he's, even though he does have, a backing as sort of a pro bender and an actor and, just his sort of association with the Avatar, maybe that's enough for him to sort of, win some minds and some hearts over, and plus his sort of personality in general. I don't know, but there's definitely, a number of different ways. I think I do hope that they do sort of cement him in one path, I guess, a bit more by the end of the series, even if it's not sort of like set in stone like everyone else seems to have. I think it would be nice for him to have, some sort of more of a sense of direction of where he's going to be, even if it's not exactly the final, job or something he's going to do.
Yeah. I just note that like Wu in his when they're talking about this, it is bolded new political blood specifically. Now it could just be a reference to obviously Guan throwing his hat in, but I wouldn't exactly call Toph new political blood, which leads me to believe that she's going to be a help in things, but that there probably will be some new twist on this in the end of some new people kind of coming in and changing things, and Bolin could be part of that. Sue, I think, is an interesting character because she's there at the start, but she's not involved in the rest of the book yet. But she's on the cover for part 2. So I suppose the obvious question is, how did they bring her in? It's obviously, if they're bringing Toph in, Sue's going to be involved somewhere. Maybe Sue wants to be there if Kuvira is going to talk to Toph. I'm not entirely sure, but the question then I think comes up is like, is Zhao Fu involved in these elections or not? And I suppose, what exact position does Sue hold in Zhao Fu? Because she's technically the leader, but I don't think they ever specified that she had a specific formal title as the leader of Zhao Fu. She was just considered like the matriarch and like kind of de facto leader, and there wasn't any overly like serious like political position necessarily that she holds in Zhao Fu. Like, she's not the president, queen, any of these kind of titles, because she doesn't like that herself. She's just sort of, my family made this place, so I have a kind of high position, but I don't like overly exert my authority on people. So the question would obviously be like, if there is in Zhao Fu, would she even want to do that herself, given her position? And then if she did, it would sort of almost make her relationship with Kuvira worse, and not like, oh, so you're running for a position of power here, but you wouldn't in the past, and that sort of thing. But how do you think they'll go about involving Sue into things? And then, given that Sue technically is the leader of a state, how do you think they're going to resolve that?
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Just the whole dynamic of Zhao Fu and how that, how she sort of created that place for herself is just interesting in itself. And I don't know what sort of like official designation does it have within the Earth Empire or within the Earth Kingdom. I don't know. I mean, her being involved isn't, too surprising just because of everything that's sort of gone there. So when Kuvira, I don't know, maybe it's something where Kuvira's sort of stepping out of line and Sue feels, more responsible toward the situation. I could see her that sort of dragging her sort of back into the situation, even if she doesn't really want to be part of the situation at all right now. So I don't know. I think I can't really see how quite they're going to sort of use her fully yet, but I definitely can see why she would be involved in anything that has to deal with Kuvira.
Hmm. Then I suppose the obvious question after that is the rest of the family. If Sue and Kuvira is going to have a you know character arc thing throughout the course of these books, I think Batar Jr. is going to have to be referenced, mentioned at some point along the way. If not, if not for his like connection to Kuvira and all that sort of stuff, but just personally himself, in that he was the other leader of these things, and like how is his potential trial going to go? And that like is it going to be a thing where Kuvira will accept any punishment that he takes, that like I just manipulated him so he's not as responsible, or does he get the exact same punishment as Kuvira? And then in all of that, you probably ask the question: does she actually care about him or not? Was it just he was a tool in her plan, or does she actually care about him? That was never overly made clear. I think the episode where she makes that decision at Kavira's Gambit gave you a hint that she kind of cared, but that her goal was more important at the time. Now she's kind of rethinking things. Is there something there? Opal got mentioned here. It would make sense for her to maybe come in at some point in the story. Um, but I think characters like Wei Wing, Huan, and Batar Senior, you don't have to include them. It'd be nice to see their perspective, and see like did the twins try and have a relationship with Kuvira or anything like that. But what are your thoughts, I suppose, on the rest of the Beifong family? Do you think they'll be involved anywhere along the way in like Kuvira's arc or anything?
I mean, I would hope that they at least are mentioned. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's it's a lot of characters that are sort of involved in the story with everything that's sort of happening here at once. Somehow one of her other kids has some sort of political sort of leaning, and they're sort of stepping up to the plate in one of these sort of situations here, or maybe even in Zaofu. That might be an interesting way to sort of keep that sort of, I guess, sort of city within sort of the family as far as, who's actually sort of ruling it. That could be interesting if they ever branch out that far. But I think in general, I don't know, I guess it really depends on how they deal with the trial as far as, him sort of having any sort of punishment, and how Sue would respond to her oldest son having to deal with his affiliation with the Earth Empire. I think that's definitely something that they should at least sort of mention or touch, just because he was number two essentially in the whole situation. So it's definitely something that needs to be at least discussed.
And then I suppose we go back to Kuvira then, and I think that the question that I have about this whole series is ultimately like, by the end of it, like where will all this development sort of leave Kuvira? Because I think it'd be a bit weird if we just get to the end of the series, we go back to the trial, she's helped out in resolving things a little bit, and she changes her plea to guilty, or they just kind of montage through the whole trial, and then by the end, just like everyone finds you guilty of these things. Here's your punishment. You're in jail for the rest of your life. That just feels like, is that really all you're going to do? You're just going to like basically zahir her, and she's just like in prison for the rest of things. In that, like, if you don't want to do anything further going forward at all with Kuvira, that's one way to do it. But I feel you almost have to have something more there, that along the way Kuvira convinces people enough that she's better used somewhere else outside of just being held in prison because of what she accomplished or something like that. That she is like, her punishment is just that she is tasked with like doing something for the rest of her life or something like that, rather than just being in prison. I just don't really see any way they end this and it is just the simple, obvious, she's in jail forever. So what are your thoughts on that? Like where are we actually heading with Kuvira coming out of this series, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, the series in general usually, has different ways about doing things, or at least when the characters have some level of depth to them, which I think Kuvira definitely has. So I guess it would be interesting if they did, with the whole idea of them having this sort of political sort of new reign and the whole democracy being, a new thing for the Earth Empire. If they did happen to sort of task her with something, along the lines of actually supporting that, I think that would be kind of interesting. But I don't know. I think she would need bit more development to really sort of see the worth in what they're sort of trying to do now versus what she did. And I don't, right now it definitely doesn't seem like she sees that fully. She's more just trying to sort of make amends for what she's done in her own sort of way here. So I think with that in mind, I guess I could see them sort of locking her away, but I think even if they were to lock her away, I could see her being involved in at least Korra directly just because of their sort of connection that they seem to have right now. And just, the whole idea of her, once being part of this family, I think she's always going to be involved in it in some way, even if it's not direct.
Hmm. Yeah. In that sense, I'm kind of like, is that maybe a way to do things? Like, if they do resolve whatever issue Kuvira has with Sue and the rest of the family, it's potentially an option to just have her like live with the family again, like, and be basically under like house arrest or something like that. With them, if whatever the plot happens and whatever it goes, that's something. Um, just to do it a little bit differently, but they're definitely open to do pretty much whatever they need to do. And then I suppose the backstory, like what are they actually going to get at with it? I suppose it really comes down to right now which way you lean on the backstory versus like what Kuvira says at the end of book 4 versus what these 2 pages here seem to show. Um, I I still can go either way on it in terms of like she wasn't abandoned by her parents, she ran away and kind of uh, redirected the blame and responsibility on them when it was just her running away from a punishment, and that's why she ended up with Sue. I think that could be a super interesting approach to take where she ran away and then blamed what happened on her parents, even though it was her overreacting, and that it is this fundamental character flaw that she has, that she never takes responsibility for what happens, and here in the present is her taking responsibility for that. Um, at least right now, I think it's hard to get to a point. I don't really see exactly how it happens. If she runs away here, we know there's more scenes with her having ran away. How you get back around to her, a situation where actually the parents abandon her in a way where it is like full on sympathy for Kuvira. They could do it still, but I almost feel it's more interesting to do it the other way. That just the simple sympathy for the villain could be, too simple of a way to do things, and that it has to be more on Kuvira herself to develop and change going forward. But what's your take on things? Do you lean in any specific direction on what way you interpret the backstory?
I don't know if there's enough of it really for me to take a full stance on. I think I like the idea of it sort of being more on her. Seems like it could work out just because of how she seems to be so sort of blasé about sort of what she's done versus, taking responsibility from it. But, with just seeing that sort of one scene there, I could definitely see it being, some situation where it wasn't, maybe the perfect sort of home life that she could have had at that sort of age. It's definitely kind of tough to say. But if she did sort of run away, that's not, that would be something that would, it could make sense with how Sue would sort of view things and how she would sort of take her in, just because of Sue's sort of background and her, her sense of freedom of doing things. So I could see, I definitely could see that being an issue that could play out as well. I think it's definitely going to be a key thing when we learn more about Kuvera's backstory and her, younger childhood, or even just sort of how, her as a character more so, just sort of how she actually, deals with certain situations rather than, her as we see her now, where she seems to be so confident of everything. We need to see, I guess, maybe a bit more sort of low points in her past, maybe to actually sort of get a good grasp of how, things actually really were.
Yeah, and then I suppose the big one between Sue and Kuvira is obviously like Kuvira basically suggests that like Sue treated her differently in some way than her actual children.
Mhm.
Did Sue actually do something wrong, make some mistakes, you know, be a different parental figure to her than her actual children, or again, is this Kuvira assigning the blame anywhere except herself? What do you think on that specific one, Kuvira and Sue? Do you do you think there will be any blame on Sue's part, or at least a lot of it, like Kuvira seems to be suggesting, or will it be more even or more towards Kuvira?
That's a good one. I mean, I don't know. I usually go towards the even on these things, but I don't know. With the way that Sue sort of responds to things, which almost seems very similar to how Kuvera deals with things, as far as not maybe fully seeing the full picture, I definitely could see, there being a sizable amount of, conflict that probably was inflicted by Sue without her sort of realizing. I mean, I guess that's sort of a Beifong trait in general with just sort of how they deal with things, which I guess Kuvira has, sort of picked up on being, raised by, or at least partially raised by Sue. So I don't know. I mean, I could definitely see it being 50-50. I could definitely could see it being more on sort of Sue as far as, certain situations going on. But there's definitely, at least right now, it seems like it's definitely more on Kuvira is how I would lean sort of at the moment. But it definitely seems like it could teeter-totter either way.
Hmm. And then I suppose what characters do you think will be sort of key to Kuvira? I suppose maybe properly changing, like she says she's changed already, but actually truly making that progress like she wants to. Do you think it will be mainly Sue? Do you think Toph will get involved there, or maybe even Korra, or actually Asami? I could actually see them having a pretty notable
Hmm.
Kuvira Asami scene going up, if, like I said, they have Kuvira address the fact that I killed your father. She's the one who killed Hiroshi. Um, there could be that could be a big thing because there is that level of yeah, she didn't come in and like apologize to any of them. She just sat there and it's just like nice to see you again, smiling at everyone as if she's done nothing wrong. Um, but what characters do you think are going to be key to actually changing Kuvira?
Yeah, no, I definitely like the idea of Asami. I think that, I don't know, it seems like they've made such a point of that so far with Asami, and I think that would definitely help, like we're always saying, we want a bit more development from Asami now, sort of like we mentioned before, this is sort of still treading the water of dealing with her sort of father, but, that is one of their, main issues that they have here. But I don't know, I also like the idea of Toph just being sort of a mentor. I think that sort of fits the role. And since she was able to help Korra, and we already mentioned so much the similarities between Korra and Kuvira, that's definitely a route that I see as having, some potential here. I mean, of course, Sue is going to be involved in it. I think Sue is a given as far as being involved in it in some way here. And I don't know, maybe Picard Jr. just because of, the family aspect, but, we would first have to get him sort of involved in the story, which I can't quite see how that's going to work right now, but it definitely could come into play later on. I mean, I think anyone who's had involved with the Earth Empire, I think, is someone who's has the potential to have some sort of know change with Kuvira. But I mean, even the brothers, they definitely have involvement with this that could be worth noting to her sort of realizing things. But I think it's I don't know. There's definitely gonna have to be some another sort of shock to her system that's gonna sort of make her sort of realize more so what she's done before and how to sort of deal with it currently and taking a bit more responsibility, even if she still believes in sort of the positives that she's done.
Yeah, I can see them maybe bringing in Opal to have like a scene or two, maybe not be super important, but like you've had Bolin sort of present her perspective on things. I think having her actually be there and give the personal kind of thoughts could be interesting. And then with Batar Jr., if they don't do it like soon in part two, I think they may just leave that until like maybe right at the end, like Kuvira gets to like see him again, and it's maybe just like a they leave it sort of open to interpretation as to what way you're meant to interpret their kind of new interaction, but like that's something to maybe heal going forward. That might be the approach that they take because he's not the most important character, but if Kuvira is going to be one of your big characters, then there's something on the table. Um, but yeah, I think that's most of what the talking points I had. Are there any other kind of things that you feel the need we should speculate on?
Um, Not particularly. I mean, I think it's all pretty out there. I think it's definitely going to be interesting. Just I don't know. I think I really like sort of the technological sort of aspect of it and how they're sort of integrating that more so in the story, since that's always been something that we've been talking about in just Korra's time in general, just sort of the progress that they're making things. So the fact that they're putting that so heavily in this book and seeing how that works later on, I think will be a key thing of note.
Hmm. I suppose we didn't mention Mako really. It doesn't really seem like he necessarily has a character arc as such going on here, even in the sense of like a smaller one like Bolin. Um, the only I think notable thing here is just like okay, he has the cast off. Um, I suppose that it's maybe worth discussing. Do you think he'll be able to firebend with his injured hand, like actually shoot fire out of it, or like will there be any I suppose lasting limitation on that hand because of his injury, or will it just be a scar? What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I would take it more to be sort of on the Scar level. I don't know. I don't know if it would be, fully 100% yet. I think that'll be something to tell when we actually sort of see him in action. But I don't know. I don't think it'll be, at least I would hope it wouldn't be something that would sort of, detract from his ability overall, or that would be, I mean, that might be an interesting arc if they wanted to give him just sort of dealing with that aspect of sort of, diminished sort of ability versus what he had before. But I don't know, with them sort of, always noting how, sort of strong of a bender he is, that would be, I guess maybe a bit sad if that is the route that they chose to go with him.
Hmm. Yeah, because I can't really remember exactly. They had him do something in Turf Wars, didn't they? Where like he like ripped it off
Yeah.
to. Did he firebend out of that injured hand, or was it just like to move better? He took it off and he still used the other hand. I can't really remember. Um.
Yeah, 'cause I think it was just more to protect, everyone than sort of Ben. So
Oh yeah, the explosion. Yeah, he protected them from the
yeah,
explosion. Yeah. So there's that. I don't know. I can maybe see them doing some weird thing where it's like he can't like lightning bend by shooting it out of
mm,
his injured hand, but he can do it on the other side or something like that. Or like something along those lines, or like the redirection he can't go one way, but he can go the other or something. I'm not really sure. It's probably getting too kind of technical at that point. It probably is just a scar, but it is interesting that it has taken him like a full comic series to kind of get over that injury.
yeah,
Um, and then going forward, like yeah, I think I don't think this is the book for his like character arc as such. Even though he seems a little more anti Kuvira from like the cop perspective, that like she's a criminal, it seems to be his approach. They don't really seem to be doing anything overly special with it. Probably like the next comic after this is maybe when they'll kind of jump in and do something. If we do go to the Fire Nation, maybe they'll give him that story arc that they had planned, but they never went ahead with. But do you have any other thoughts on Mako in terms of do you think they'll do anything with him here, or is he just here like a lot of the Avatar comics because he's part of the team, just to be here, have the team together?
yeah. I mean, it doesn't seem like he would have an overly sort of like I guess, big sort of involvement as far as, like changing the course of things. He definitely, so gives a certain level of support and gives, another sort of varying, set of opinions on situations. But I don't know if he's going to have, as huge an impact as we've seen him have before.
Hmm. So yeah, I think that's most of the speculation there is to have right now on Runes of the Empire Part 2. Um, I suppose depending on how things go, I don't know when review copies will go up for this. I might be able to get a review copy of this sooner rather than later, but we'll have to see on that. The Part 3 cover going live is going to be, I think, a pretty interesting one to see what they do with it. I assume Kuvira is going to be there, and then at times the Part 3s can tell a little bit more about what's going on, so that could be pretty interesting, just to see whenever they reveal that. But that's really all there is to kind of talk about this time out. So yeah, we'll probably be back in another week or two with another podcast to catch up on some kind of news and stuff like that. But for now, yeah, that's been the review for Legend of Korra: Runes of the Empire Part 1. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye bye.